Welcome back, Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut. We are back to doing our original series. Maseches Sotah is about to begin. We are finishing Maseches Nazir. We already recorded an episode special for Maseches Nazir, the controversy of 1513 Nazir Shimshon, to be released very soon. Perhaps when you're listening to this, it will already have been released. But now we're going to go and do an episode on Masechta Sotah throughout the generations. We've been doing these before every Masechta, and Rabbi Brut always has something interesting to add about the history of how the Masechta was learned, the Rishonim, the Achronim, some contemporary Svarim, and maybe some other surprises about whether or not did we ever have the Parsha of Sotah happen throughout the generations. So Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Brut, Baruch Hashem, there was someone kind enough to step up, an anonymous sponsor, and is sponsoring this episode. Le'ila Nishmas, his mother, Bluma Bas David Mordechai. All the learning should be in her memory and should be an Eloi for her neshama. Rabbi Brut, how are you today?
Baruch Hashem.
Okay, so why don't you jump right in? Masechta Sotah. Does it have any interesting stories like Nadarim or Moed Katan about how it was learned? Or this is just a regular Masechta? I'm very, very excited, by the way, because we finally get back to learning Rashi. We've been missing the Rashis in Nadarim and Nazir, and Sotah is real Rashi, right? Can we confirm that?
I'm pretty sure. I could not find anyone that does not believe it's real Rashi. Yes, it's a lot of people are very excited that it's back to real Rashi. But as we get to certain parts of Taisus over here, that we'll discuss that, because there's even parts in your Gemaras that don't even have Taisus. But we'll get to that shortly. Okay, so what we always do is basically we throughout this we'll see if Sotah was really learned. What does it mean really learned? Was it learned in yeshiva curriculums or stuff like that? And through Rishonim and Achronim that are out there, and some other things. So first, I always throw out there just to begin. What about the tools for the Gemara? So the Gemara, in every Masechta, there's numerous manuscripts. We touched a little bit about the general story of manuscripts in the Gemara in one of the latest episodes of Chaim Kanievsky, the Chibur de Duke Seifrim, which is a collection of manuscripts. So this Masechta Sotah has 2 volumes from Mechon Talmud Yisraeli, which collects numerous girsais of the Gemaras and Kisvei Yad. So that's a valuable tool out there. More recent, there's been 2 doctorates written on different parakim in Masechta Sotah, also manuscripts and this type of stuff. And there's a Mishnayos called Mishnayos Safra, the Mishnayos Eretz Yisrael from the Safrai family, which also is a sort of more academic version of more academic interpretation of Masechta Sotah, which has some usefulness, especially the introduction is very useful also over here. Okay. There's one academic book. There's probably many. I'm not aware of all the academic books that are on the Masechta, but just one, and we'll get to talking about what the title sounds like in a second. It says it's called Hatekes Shelo Haya. Means we have a Masechta Sotah, which most of it deals with the Sotah, with a woman, and eventually drinking and possibly, as you called it, blowing up, so to speak. If she turns out that she's there's a problem over here, which we'll learn about in Masechta Sotah. So this is the question is there's certain sugyas like Zaki Mamre, we know that it's a sort of like Dreish Umkabel Schar, that it never really happened. So there are some people that say maybe Sotah didn't happen, or if it happened, it stopped at a certain point in time, especially Lamashal Halacha Lamaisa today. It's Sotah, most of Hilchas Sotah is not applicable today, especially with all aspects of the tekes of Sotah. So interestingly enough, there's one makar from a very interesting Rishon called Sefer Tziyuni, which has gotten fame in recent years. Rav Moshe, it's quoted by many Gedolim over the generations. Rav Moshe was not so into the Sefer. The question is if he wasn't into the Sefer or particular pieces, but that's not for now. But many Gedolim did quote it throughout the generations.
What do you mean Rav Moshe wasn't into the Sefer?
There was some, I'm not going to get into it now because it's really a very worthy topic one time to talk, but there was a manuscript discovered of, which was miyuchas, or believed to be from Rabbi Yehuda Chassid, and there were some passages in there that was very problematic. Certain Gedolim said it must be that this work is a ziyuf. It's a forgery. And one of the ways how they were able to say that it's not a forgery is because similar pieces are found in the Sefer Tziyuni. Some people said, who is this Tziyuni? Today we know much more about him. He's much closer to the Tkufa de Maril. We know a lot about him. We know about the Sefer, Lamashal, the Chidaz, Proet, and as I said, a lot of Chashava people did use it throughout the generations. But all in all, it is an interesting type of Sefer. You'll find interesting passages, such as what I'm about to quote. He talks about, he brings down, Chazal say, Sotah loy haisav loy nivra. And the question is that really true? What this Tziyuni says, and there are so Rabbi Yitzchak, so there's a sefer which is always worth to know about. I mentioned in the past in Maseches Ma'ikatan and in Chagiga called Magidim Chadashim. It's written by a contemporary Yid in Yerushalayim, David Yoel Weiss. David Yoel Weiss. Now he has 5 beautiful volumes, Ala Torah. I highly recommend them. Very fascinating information. And in Chumash Bamidbar, he has a whole discussion about this Tziyuni. He brings down a whole a piece from the Chibur L'Mashal Yitzchak Weiss, Siach Yitzchak, where they discuss the various Makairis that show that there was stories of Sotah based on Gemaras, Chazals, that it did happen. Now, but the question goes, what about after the Beis HaMikdash? So this, interestingly enough, I've quoted him in the past, a friend of mine, Rabbi Yaakov Stahl, he collected a few pieces about it. Others also did. He wrote up about it, and now it's no longer active. But there was an online journal called Dacha, and he wrote a 3-page article there. I'm more than happy to send it to anyone who asks via email. But anyway, the sources are that it seems like Lamashal, there was a chibur written around the year 1000, where there was this great yid. It seems like they did do some type of form of a Sotah when there was a case, and even with the Shemos and everything like that. So there is some type of source. There are Makairis in the Geniza, not so many, but some sources also that it seems they did perform such a thing when there was a chash of a woman and everything, and they did do something similar to what the Gemaras talk about. And just to mention 2 other things about this, one is a story brought down in a few different places with the Chidah. At one time, seems the case that there was a woman, that there was a chash on her and everything, and bottom line is the Chidah was a Kayin and his wife. There was a chash that she was with the Yechidus with a man and everything, and they brought it to the Torah, and basically they wanted to pass in the Dintayr without Adim even, said there's no such thing, said what do you mean, there's a Parsha of Sotah. It seems that he said something to the effect that they should read Parsha Sotah. They should take out the Sefer Torah of Yikach, Sefer Torah of Yikach, Ba'aznei Parsha Sotah, Betame and Aginois, and they'll see from this, and it seems like certain people didn't want to do it, and they did, and it turns out that it was Mavar that I believe that it was a problem. This woman was. There was, based on this, after they read the parsha, they saw there was what to be chayshish, so to speak. And Reb Chaim Kanievsky brings this story down to show that sometimes there's incredible meifsim that happen out of the ordinary. This is in his Orchos Yosher, and he says Vishamati that the steps where this story exactly happened was still around till right before the war, something to the effect. So there was some type of, all I'm trying to bring out over here is there are some type of sources about them doing this after Beis HaMikdash, even as late as the Chidah.
So regarding the Mechaber of the Megadim Chadashim, Rabbi Weiss, I believe Sruli Bornstein had a shaykhis to him, has a shaykhis to him, and he met him and they recorded something once at a prior siyum. And regarding the last thing you said, this Orchos Yosher, where could someone find this Orchos Yosher from Chaim Kanievsky?
1 second. It's actually a very interesting chapter. It's called in Parak Hashgacha, page Chaf Daled through Chaf Zayin. There's some very interesting stories over there, and there actually Chaim Kanievsky also brings down one of the versions, the whole story by Arichos of this Chidah. To show the meifsim with big gedolim. Okay, but anyway, this was just a very big tangent, I like to call it, and let's get back to the main focus over here, which is first of all the Rishonim. So we mentioned Rashi. It seems by all accounts it's Rashi. What about Tosfos? So when you open up your Shas Vilna, you'll see there's a Tosfos, and you'll also see that there's on the side in a lot of places what's called Tosfos Shantz. Now, in all Masechtas, there's always a dion who's the author of the particular Tosfos. There's also a Taisis Rush. There's a Taisis Me'ivra. Now, I am not going to attempt to the final call of what's what in all these Rishonim has still not been made, because there's constantly new discoveries being made, as I'm about to mention. And therefore, so there was a Yid Lamashal Yaakov Lipschitz that he wrote about it. He published what's called the Chachmei Me'ivra, and it's unclear what's what, but there's basically, if one wants to learn, there are various Taisis that will help them, such as Taisis Rush, Taisis Israel, Taisis Shantz, and it could be some of them are really the same. But that is as far as Taisis goes. Now, is there anything else? So in 1795, the Meiri was published and was used from then on. And then in 1800, we've mentioned in the past, there was a chibur. It seems that this person had access to the Shittim Kubetzes, and he published material from the Shittim Kubetzes on Masechtes Sotah. Now, for many years, if one would buy a Shittim Kubetzes, they only got up to, I believe, 1 second, I'll tell you. It did not cover the whole Masechta. It was only, I think, the first few prakim. So even if you did have a Shittim Kubetzes, you mamish had a few pages, maybe 15 blot, and it wasn't even all that, and it wasn't even all that much information. So you're pretty much stuck. You don't have all that much Rishonim. Now, turns out that, as far as new discoveries go, and I always like to mention these things, so just recently, less than 3 years ago, a discovery was made. Where did this Shittim Kubetzes come from in 1800? So it seems this gadol, he got a hold of a manuscript of the Shittim Kubetzes. It seems he had a Gemara which had on the side different ha'aris and hagais of the Shittim Kubetzes. The Shittim Kubetzes used to make all different types of corrections, and he would add materials on the side. So here, but he writes in this thing that it was lost. We say he copied X amount of material, but then the Gemara disappeared. It seems the Gemara was discovered again, and now it was just issued through Meiser of Cook and Tafshin Pei Aleph, a beautiful edition on the whole Masechta of Masechtas Nazir. Sorry, of Masechtas Sotah. I'm getting very confused because Meiser of Cook has, if you go to this farm store to buy Shittim Kubetzes from Meiser of Cook, so they recently started doing the Shittim Kubetzes. So they have what's called a set Shittim Kubetzes. So if you buy the volume of Sotah, you'll see it's only a few pages. Then recently, mamish, they have a new one, and it says on the side, you have to look carefully, it says Shittim Kubetzes HaChadasha. That's just Sotah, and that's on the whole Masechta. This is this brand new discovery from a few years ago. They found the Gemara of the Shittim Kubetzes with Hagais on the side, and they were able to publish much more of the rest of the Masechta. Even though they made this discovery, it's not like there's a ton. I mean, say, when one learns Shittim Kubetzes on Baba Kama, Baba Matzia, Lamashal, there's endless material, endless Rishonim, because it wasn't so learned in the times of Rishonim, and the reason is very simple. It seems, and that is that the main focus always is halacha l'maisa. Most of Masechta Sotah was not so halacha l'maisa. Okay. One other rishon to mention, and then we move on, is the Rambam and Perush Mishnayos. So the Rambam and Perush Mishnayos is always important on Masechta Sotah. One of these projects where they reinterpret the Arabic and everything like that from a fellow Reb Noam Balzem. So he put out V.I. Meister of Cook, a whole fancy edition with a running beer on the Rambam Perush Mishnayos. So that's another useful tool, because anytime we don't have Rishonim, whatever Rishonim we do have, we like to mention and know that they're out there. Okay, so that's briefly the story of the Rishonim. But one thing is, it seems from what we know today, it wasn't really learned in yeshivas. The Gedolei Rishonim did not give shir on Sotah and everything. Okay, now moving on. What about the Tkufa Zachronim? Zachronim here also we don't really have so much. It seems it was not part of what I called already in the past a few different times the yeshiva cycle. But we do have, interestingly enough, the famous chibur from the Be'er Sheva, one of the early Achronim. So he has the last 3 prakim. He has a perush. What's going on? Why not hold Masechta? So one of the things is, which perhaps a different time we'll go much more into the to the actual chibur of the Be'er Sheva and the chashivas of this unique chibur. But one of the things he was looking for was Masechtas that didn't have taisvis. He wanted to fill in that gap. So the end of Sotah does not have so much taisis. So that's why the end of the Masechtas of, let's say, Sotah, for example, he wrote a pirush, and so we have a few prakim from the great Be'er Sheva. So that's already useful. Now, interestingly enough, the Marsha we do have, and as I already spoke out a few times, the Marsha in general, it seems, he only published on what he learned with Talmidim. So maybe he didn't give shir as Rosh Hashiva to it, but we do know that he, even early on, his parish was written with a kfutza of people, a kail of some sort. So maybe he learned Sotah with that. But we have a large amount of material in Sotah from the Marsha. It could be a lot of it's more because it's Agadata, so maybe that's a different story with the Marsha and Agadata. I did not have a chance to look into that. But the point is that we have these two achronim. Other than that, at this point, if you're handling, let's say, 1600s, there's nothing out there on Sotah for the most part. Fast forward for a very long time, and I would say the first time a real, I guess, a famous work or a work that becomes used is in 1869 from the Karen Ayer, which we've already mentioned a few times in his other Maseches that he's written about, and we've spoken a little bit about his method. What about Yeshivas Valazhin, which I always like to talk about for a second? So it seems they learned it in Yeshiva, just like all other Maseches. We have a nice amount of material from the Tziv in his Meraime Sotah. So we have that also. But now we're getting later and later into the 1800s, and there's not any real chiburim on the Masechta. 1894, the great Galiciano Gadol Ramei Arik prints a sefer called Minchas Kanayis, and this sefer became very famous. I did not check how famous it became, but from what I always recall, it was accepted right away. Ramei Arik was legendary for, amongst other things, he had an incredible Bekias, and it's very clear from learning through this sefer. You'll see this. He's using Bavli's Yerushalmis and all these types of materials, and also Rishainim, including the Meiri, which is in general fits with what we know Ramei Arik. He was into using all these new Rishainim, which ayin into the Shiurim of Ruchaim Kanievsky, which we said was pretty much standard in that period of time anyway. One of his Talmidim, the great Rav Shalom Roth, wrote Ha'aris Be'iyun on many of the pieces in this sefer from Ramei Arik. He calls him Lamashal Ramei Meiri. We do know that he uses Talmud of some sort. It needs clarification exactly the relationship, but this great Galiciano Gadol Rav Shalom Roth wrote a lot of Ha'aris on it. They're published in his Kol Mavaser. And another Gadol at the time was Reb Nosson Segel Landau. He wrote a chibur on Sotah called Kerem Neta, literally a year after Ramei Arik. And it seems he was brought to his attention as also Ramei Arik, so then he ends up writing a kuntris of Ha'aris on the whole chibur. In recent years, hold on, let me just see where I can find it. In recent years, so in Lakewood, I believe it was, 1 second, let me check. A new edition of the Minchas Kanais came out. Yeah, from Lakewood, less than 10 years ago. It was done by Eliezer Ralbag and Israel Katz. They did a very nice job with Ha'aris, and they also collected all these, what I just mentioned, from Ramei Arik and from Rosh Roth and from Nosson Segel Landau. Okay, now a little later is an author which we've also mentioned in the past. He also wrote like 7 or 8 Masechtas. I believe he learned in Valazhin, Reb Moshe Luria. So he wrote a chibur called Toras HaKanais, 1899, and it seems that at some point he got the chibur of Ramei Arik and he starts using it also. Fine. So already we see, I guess in the 1890s, there's some more, that some Gedolim at least are learning it, and there's now a nice sefer on the Masechta, and another such sefer from Rav Nosson Segel Landau, and now you have the Toras HaKanais. Fast forward a little later, 1914, you have the Minchas Chareva from Rav Pinchas Epstein, who ends up becoming one of the Dayanim on the Badatz. Now, he has very chashav askamas, his sefer, and in recent years, Mechon Yerushalayim did a massive job on him, putting out 2 volumes, collecting all his materials. He was close with all the various Gedolim, Rabbi Chaim Sonnenfeld, I believe, Rabbi Shulei Diskin's son, Rabbi Yitzchak Diskin. He had a very close relationship, and many other Gedolim, and this is also another go-to sefer became on Masechta Sotah. Okay, fast forward a little later, 1929. So this sefer, I don't know if I came across it before, but recently my brother-in-law was mentioning to me about Sotah that there's such a sefer for some other reason. It's called Mishberei Yam. It's from Reb Michal Winkler. So originally this person seems to have been born in Eretz Yisrael, and then he ends up becoming a Rav in a few different places. Copenhagen, it says, and he had a mind-boggling Bekias. Very kedai to have the sefer. It's available on Hebrew Books and Eitzah Chachma. Interesting, I try to find material about him, and it seems there does exist, but I was not able to get it in time. In the newspapers, the Mavaser newspapers a few years ago printed some material about him.
there's a Winkler in Lakewood, and there was just an article. I know they're from Denmark, and there was a Yid who was like 100 years old, and he just passed away. I'm assuming it's the
It
same
sounds like,
family.
yes, yeah. I think it is that family, and it's Chaval because I would have reached out years ago about it, but I think it is that family. Yeah, yes, correct. That's what I'm able to see. So anyway, the point is that there's this. But the Sefer also again has very tremendous Bekias. Bekias, we're talking of Sefer Chazal, mind-boggling, and also of everything that's out there. But again, even in the Ramei Arik, we have this, and we have this in the Sefer Minchas Chareva from Reb Pinchas Epstein also. So they all have a lot of Bekias, tremendous, but also Havana, and these three Svarim are great Svarim to know about. They're all available on Hebrew books. Now, just to go off a drop, we have on the Rambam. So already there was a sefer from a Reb Ravel, who wrote a sefer called Eitzer HaSotah in the 40s, where he deals with the Rambam. I guess he collected what he felt or what he had access to, various Rambam manuscripts and materials of the Rambam, different printings of the Rambam, and he wrote a different style chibur on different aspects of using the Rambam on Sotah as his springboard to talk about Masechta Sotah. This sefer, one of the ways I came across it, I might have it, I don't remember anymore, but I did come across it through Reb Shlomo Yosef Zevin. In his book reviews, he reviews this sefer, so I always remember about that also. And his father was a Ravel from Yeshiva University, who was a prolific author. I don't know if prolific author, but he wrote many beautiful articles. Similarly, there's also the Rambam, writing up the Rambam in Mishnah Berurah type style, which we've discussed already a few times in both Reb Chaim Kanievsky, that there became a whole genre to copy the Mishnah Berurah, and you do it on the Rambam and even on other Svarim. And there's a long list created of these type of svarim. So on Masechta Sotah, there is one such sefer from someone in, I believe it's someone in Bnei Brak, someone who learns in Panovich, Reb Shraga Sternfeld. And it's a very nice sefer where what's interesting is when you open up the sefer for this particular sefer, is we just got finished saying Sotah doesn't have all that many Mefarshim. There's not that many Rishonim, but when you look at the sefer, it's a few hundred pages, and he has tons and tons of Marmakaimis, and it looks like there's what to say about Sotah even without the Rishonim. Okay, but is there other svarim? So there are. So just to mention a few more contemporary svarim as follows. One is there's Rebbe Yashiv. There's this series of Rebbe Yashiv's Ha'aros on the Masechtas on Sotah, very nice stuff. So there's a whole chibur on Gans Masechta Sotah. He for sure gave a shiurim on Sotah a few times. There's another sefer which I'll just mention for a different reason. There's a sefer Darkei Dava from Reb Kassel. I think he was a Maggid Shir in Itri. And one of the things that's always interesting in Sfarim is Hagdamas. So this is a Hagdama of a Mechaber, current. I believe he's still alive. I'm not sure, I didn't check into it, but he has a vicious attack on our generation, like a real serious hardcore Musar shmooze about different things that are going on, I guess, in the 80s and 90s even, which should definitely be applicable to us today. It might have been censored out of later editions of the Sefer, but I have a PDF of the Hagdama. If someone wants to read it, it's a very stark Musar shmooze about different things going on. Now, just to mention, literally a few weeks ago, a Sefer came out on Sotah called Megillah Sotah. Also, when you open it up, if you were nervous, you didn't have Rishonim, not gonna have what to learn. So this is a 1,000-page sefer on Sotah. And then just yesterday, I picked up a sefer from this Israel Katz, where I mentioned he was involved with the Minchas Kanais. So he put out also a almost 1,000-page sefer on Sotah from Lakewood. And one of the things that's interesting is that Sotah has a lot of different sugyos. I saw on Shabbos, there was an advertisement for the famous Daf Yomi shir that's in Ramat Beit Shemesh, but it's posted worldwide from Rabbi Stefanski. So they're always trying to get people to join the Masechta. So someone broke down all the different sugyas that one could find in Masechta Sotah. So each one really, technically, I should give a shir about all the svarim, but I felt, to talk about every sefer that could be a half a amud, then will be. But one of the interesting things is this fellow, just to throw out there, this Israel Katz wrote up as a kuntrus a bunch of years back about the Aron. So here he published it in this Sefer Ali Ber, Maybe it's updated. I didn't check. And he also has ha'aris of various people in the back, and he never published before ha'aris of Ramesha Feinstein on Masechta Sotah. So it sounds also promising. I just got it yesterday, so I can't comment about it. And one last thing that also came out from Lakewood from the other fellow who worked on Minchas Kanais, Ralbag, which is they have the Hagais of Rabbi Shulei Diskin on his Gemara. So here they publish from time to time a Masechta with, sometimes they make a fancier editions, but they have his Ha'aris of Rabbi Shulei with explaining what these Ha'aris are. So that also just came out the past few days. Okay. Now, just to conclude with two last things. Number one of the sugyas that in Masechta Sotah where it is halacha l'maisa is hilchas birchas kayanim. So this, I'm not going to start mentioning all the svarim out there that there are on birchas kayanim in recent years, but kedarkai of these type of things, there's a lot. I'll just mention three that I came across recently. One's a sefer Esa Kapai, published. Hold on. Printed in the past 3-4 years from a fellow in Bnei Brak, Reb Chaim Katz. So here he has a lot of discussion on with letters also that he got from different people relating to Nesias Kapayim, but he also has many shiurim. He found some type of topic almost in every parsha to tie in Nesias Kapayim. Another sefer is called Vania Varchem, also a sefer on Hilchos Nesias Kapayim with the emphasis of not only now but also Beis Hamikdash. This came out in the past year. Another sefer came in the past few years called Baruch Umekudash, which is Dine Birchas Kehanim and Regim Yisrael Hamizvarich. A Kayin is Hilchas Kayanim. What about the Yisrael that's getting blessed at this time? Is those the halachas of that? That's that focus. Everyone's always looking for an angle. So here you have in Birchas Kehanim an angle in the Birchas Kehanim. And one last sefer that just to mention is just now my friend Yaakov Shmuel Spiegel put out a sefer, a pulmus that took place in the late 1700s. Also something to do with Birchas Kehanim, and he printed all the different chiyuburim from manuscript, which shows the kayach of minig and discussion of minig that ends up happening in what was going on in Italy about Birchas Kehanim. Interesting sefer that just came to print also this past year. The last thing to mention is Egla Rufa is a nice amount of material, Egla Rufa, so that everyone today in the past year has become very famous. The Nachal Eson Reb Chaim Kanievsky, Kedai to learn, and we devoted a whole episode just on this sefer to discuss the chashivas of the sefer, mind-boggling sefer Reb Chaim Kanievsky, like all the svarim, worthwhile to keep in mind when you get up to those parts. At least it's available on Hebrew books, and one could just pull it off and look at it and see and enjoy. But these are just some of the materials out there on Masechta Sotah. In all, from what I always heard, I did learn it very quickly a few times. It's a beautiful Masechta. It's very kedai to learn, even if you're not learning Daf Yomi always. But it's an easy Masechta. It's a few months of learning, and you gain a lot from it. Okay, now there's one sefer that deserves its own mention over here, and that is like this. I mentioned that basically from the 1600s pretty much till 1894, there's almost nothing on Masechta Sotah. But it turns out there was something written in that period of time devoted dafka to Masechta Sotah. Okay, and that is a sefer called Minchas Sotah. And this mechaber, his name was Rabbi Avram ibn Musa, and we mentioned him actually in Masechtas Yuma. Why? Because he was known is in the famous sefer Masechtas Yuma. The go-to sefer Masechtas Yuma was the Sich Yitzchak, and the Sich Yitzchak quotes this sefer. He had in Ksav Yad. He wrote a chibur on Yuma. So a few years ago, and right before Daf Yomi was learning Masechtas Yuma, they found his manuscripts on Yuma and they published it. Okay. Turns out, Ahavat Shalom a few years earlier, in 1999, I believe it was, they published his chibur on Masechtas Sotah from Ksav Yad. They call it Shita Masechta Sotah. The reason they call it like this is because he deals with literally everything. He focuses on Pshat, he focuses on Gersais, he focuses on Kabbalah, because there's a lot of Agadta in here. Now, turns out this Mechaber was a guy in Olam, but he was also known as a tremendous Makabal. Almost nothing was published in his lifetime, but it seems a lot still exists today. Professor Meir Ben-Yo wrote a massive, beautiful article on him and his son, published in the journal Michael, and later on Ahavat Shalom, based on newer materials that they got besides the article from Meir Ben Ayo, which they do give credit to, they added more information about this great gadol, and they printed a beautiful edition. And it sold out immediately in 1999. And for years, people were looking for it. When you learn Masechta Sotah, finally a sefer comes out on the whole Masechta Sotah. Now, when does this Mechaber die? He dies in 1733. So here we have an early Chibur on Sotah, but it takes years. It takes till 1999 till it comes out. But what all that we see is there was someone that did learn this Masechta, and fascinating sefer. And then Havat Shalom in recent years, they finally did republish it. I believe you could get it today. He was a great Makubal. Even brings down Torah that he had in his dreams in this sefer and his other writings, and there's some stories about him in the fascinating work Maseches Tzadikim from Avram Kalfein. Avram Kalfein, this Chibur Maseches Tzadikim was only published a manuscript also recently, but they knew about it earlier. Who was the footnoter or one of the footnoters of this Madura for Ahavat Shalom? This Rabbi Yoel Weiss, the author of the Magidim Chadashim. So it's very interesting. So he did a good job. And the last point is there's interesting pieces of Musar also for his generation in this sefer. Also, excellent Hagdama, very well worth your time to read. But in general, this is a chibur on the whole Masechta. So it's a fitting conclusion, because I basically listed out all this farm. I take a big jump to the 1894 when Ramey Arik publishes it, and then I jump all the way to the more recent farm. But then this was a manuscript discovered. And in our generation was zeicha to using it, to have it, and many people use it. As I said, it sold out right away. And Baruch Hashem, it's available now in its second printing. So it's worth knowing and using and maybe even buying.
Amazing. So while you were going on, I quickly Googled this Winkler, and he had a son in Lakewood, Menashe Winkler, and David Safir and Yehuda Geberer met him. They had their thing with the Mishpacha, meeting Eyes of the Angels. And then I see David Safir wrote an article about the son, and he writes there that this father, Michal Tzvi Winkler, died in America in 1932 fundraising, and he's buried in Queens. And they have a picture of Chanan, I think, visiting his caver. And his son learned by all the yeshivas, by Baranovich and Radin and Kamenetz, and they have a fascinating discussion. So if anybody wants that, you could Google it or reach out to me. And the second thing is that this is Real Cats I know personally very, very well. He lives pretty close to me. And he told me he's putting out the sefer. And he mentioned to me that he got, I think, 18 pages of never published before manuscripts from Ramosha, from Ramosha's Einiklach that you mentioned were redone and printed in the sefer. So Baruch Hashem.
So I would say the moral of the story is that even though back in the times of Rishonim they barely learned it, but today there's no excuses, especially after you have Art Scroll, Hebrew, English, you Masifta, you have everything, and you have all daf. So there's no excuses not to learn the Masechta, at least this Masechta, forget about Daf Yomi. But yeah.
Take one of these Sfarim, sit down on Shabbos for a little bit of time and open up these Sfarim. There's fascinating material and insights from these new Sfarim that you just mentioned. And thank you very much, and looking forward to the next one.